Hey everybody, sticking with chapter 2, key issue 2 here. This is the most important key issue, obviously in this chapter, and probably the most important chapter or key issue in the book. It's a demographic transition. Before we get into that, why is global population increasing? Remember the formula. Natural increase rate is your crude birth rate minus your crude death rate, and then move the decimal over one spot and you convert it to a percentage. Sometimes you'll see it per 1,000 people, like we see IMR and other statistics. So I've added that on here as well. So 3 people per 1,000 people. So that means 3 people were added for every 1,000 people in the country. Remember that 0.3% or 3 per 1,000, that's actually pretty low, and that's pretty good actually. Remember, these are the statistics that are kind of deceiving. You know, the NIR of the world today is 1.2%, and you say, well, 1.2%, that's like nothing. But that's 80 million people added to the planet every year, per year. Next year, we're adding another 80 million. So just keep in mind, you want to be below 1% typically. There are places where those numbers are flipped, where the CDR is actually larger than the CBR, which creates a negative natural increase rate, which you say, okay, that's fine. We have too many people. Yeah, but when you do it regionally by Europe or even a smaller scale by country, it doesn't help. You want an increase or a slight increase because it actually creates jobs within your economy. So you don't want to have a negative natural increase rate. The peak was 2.2 in 1963, which was essentially, or for example, if you had that in your country, and your country was 20 million people, you added 440,000 babies to your country that particular year, which is just off the charts, because you don't get away from that 2.2% very quickly. And if that's your country, you're probably in the 2% range for several years. And that's some of the problems that LDCs face, is just growing too fast. Fertility, remember, doubling time is basically how long it takes for the world or country or whatever you're measuring to double in size. So a geographer figured out the formula. It's basically 70. So you take 70, divide it by whatever your natural increase rate is, and so we're using the world here, 1.2. That's 54 years to double our 7 billion people. So in your lifetime, there'll be 14 billion people on the planet. But in the current state, I would think that NIR will start coming down. The total fertility rate, if you remember that, that's the number of kids that a woman will have during her childbearing years. That's always a significant number to look at because it's really high in Africa, as high as 6 or 7 in some places. IMR is significant because that tells us a lot about the healthcare system. That's an important number to know. For example, if it's 10% in Africa, that tells you that they've got a poor healthcare system. The good countries, like in Europe and the United States, were in the low single digits, 4, 5, and 6, which is much better. You want that to be at 0, of course, but it'll never happen. Accidents, sudden infant death syndrome, things like that. It'd be nice to get to 0, but unfortunately we just can't do it. And remember, MDCs always have the lowest natural increase rates, crude death rates, total fertility rates, infant mortality rates, and also LE is life expectancy, right? This is all about healthcare and access to that healthcare. Stage 1 of the demographic transition, there's your graph. Remember, nobody's in here anymore, but this basically lasted until 1750 or so. Food was just too unpredictable. We didn't know where it was coming from. There's still plagues and diseases. There's no health care. That's why if you look in stage 1, the graph is basically all over the place. And so the population wasn't growing. That we were learning to farm. We were learning to find food in a better way. But we hadn't learned to really grow it all that great yet. But that's obviously going to change with a couple of revolutions. Stage 2, basically everyone has gotten here. And this basically begins in 1750 because of step 4 there, the Industrial Revolution, where we begin to mechanize our farming practices, begin to mechanize our healthcare practices, and that leads into the medical revolution. Remember, they go in that order. The Industrial Revolution comes first, with improved farming, with increased factories, increased technology and medical, and then the medical revolution then begins. But basically, this is the high growth stage. You were essentially seeing, if you look at the graph there, the natural increase rates skyrocket because the births have stayed the same. But because of the Industrial Revolution, the medical revolutions, the death line begins to drop. And the math is simple. That's why when you have a huge gap like that, the math tells us the natural increase rate is going to get much higher. Do you want to stay in this stage very long? No. We want everyone in there, and everyone's made it. The goal is in stage 2, get out as fast as you can because you want to get into stage 3. This is where we begin to see a drop in the natural increase rate. Population still grows because there's still a gap, right? Look at the red and blue lines. There's still a gap between births and deaths. So natural increase rate is still going up, but not as fast as it was in stage 2. Those blue lines and red lines are beginning to get closer and closer and closer. So natural increase rate begins to drop. This is decreasing growth or moderate growth. We see this in places like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, a handful of Asian countries. They're getting wealthier as well. The healthcare is starting to kick in. Family planning is starting to kick in. And that's when you begin to see fewer and fewer babies. Stage 4, this is the stage we're in. This is where births and deaths essentially reach the same point and creates a zero population growth, or ZPG. Remember, the total fertility rate must be 2.1. That 0.1 accounts for infant mortality rate. We're in this category, but we allow immigration, and so that's why we still have an increasing population. But for all intents and purposes, we've reached ZPG. The role of women here is significant. They're staying in school longer. They're getting jobs. They're getting college degrees. They're using family planning practices more and more often. When women are more involved in the process, that's when you begin to see births and deaths essentially equal. And that's all about the equal rights. There is a possible stage 5. A couple countries are in there, Japan, Eastern European countries, some other in Western Europe, Germany maybe, Russia is. Negative population growth, that's when now births and deaths have basically switched places on the graph. There's actually more deaths than births. And that's happening. Who knows how long those countries will stay in there. Maybe 10 years they'll make it an official stage. Okay, let's stop there.